this alone. Even though I am strong, need something more than me, someone to push me to victory. Let's see what we can do together, me and you. Can't be afraid to try. Kiss your fears goodbye. No looking back. You and I were on the attack, full speed ahead, running to the sunset. Such a different feeling. Both of us believing we can make it better. He's the fastest thing alive.
I guess we cut right to the chase on this one because everyone's favorite blue hedgehog needs no introduction, and it must be pretty clear by now that I'm a huge fan. Despite only being 25, I was a 16-bit kid due to being in a lower-income household. I mean, for the longest time, my only gaming devices were my Game Boy Color, my Super Nintendo, and my Sega Genesis that were all either gifts, hand-me-downs, or from a pawn shop. I didn't even have anything up to date until sometime around my 12th birthday when my mom scrounged up enough money to get me my first PS2. So of course, Sonic had some of my earliest gaming memories, even though I sucked at video games as a child and never managed to get very far in any of them. Whether it be the classic games or vague memories of playing Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast my sister had at her house. My first exposure to Sonic as a real fully voiced character, as part of a more in-depth story, was actually a VHS tape of Sad AM that I got from Walmart as a child. So you can imagine I was doubly excited by the premise of a more serious Sonic title about playing as the Resistance after Eggman had already won. It was like going back to the roots of where Sonic and his world first came to life for me, instead of just being silent pixels on a screen being guided through Green Hill Zone by my own two hands. I mean, I remember when I was 14, at the height of my first foray into Sonic as a gateway fandom, and broke my wallet paying a local movie store to order the Shout Factory box set for me. Something that's still one of the most cherished pieces of my DVD collection to this day. Just so much love and care put into it, with fan art coding every inch of it, to say thanks to the fans that held on for nearly 15 years to push it and finally get the show a proper home release in complete form. God, it's like holding pure nostalgia and a reminder of what fan community can be at its best in my hands. Just look at this thing. When the fact it was slated to have a PC port right out of the gate caught my eye, I was even more intrigued. It's not like we've gone without on the PC, because there's a decent port of Sonic Adventure 1 and a stellar port of Sonic Adventure 2. But we've been kind of lacking in more modern 3D titles. Sure, we have both the All-Star Racing spin-offs, but as far as mainline modern Sonic games, the most recent we've had were the PC port of Generations and a port of Lost Worlds that came quite a while after its original Wii U release. The fact two major Sonic titles were stated for the PC at once in the form of Mania and Forces makes me hopeful its assigned saga will expand and we'll see PC versions of other Sonic games in the future. Could we maybe expect an enhanced port of Unleashed to really do its high quality visuals justice at a full 1080p or even higher in 60 FPS? I don't know, but it's sure fun to dream about. You can bet I pre-ordered as soon as the Humble store started selling keys I could get a deal on with my Humble monthly discount. After all, I couldn't say no to a AAA Sonic title that launched for $40 and went down to $36 after my discount, especially when $4 of my money went to charity. Time passed and we all eagerly awaited its launch. I had even decided to order a new graphics card around the launch date and paid rush shipping in a futile attempt to have it beat the game into my hands. For those curious, the card I ordered was a 6GB GTX 1060 that I am very happy with. It is the Nvidia card that is about on equal footing to the RX 580 that can be compared to the GPU in the Xbox One X. Now I have to be honest with you guys here and get the big negative out of the way first. November 7th came and the PC launch was a massive disaster. I wasn't up and around early enough to download the game as soon as it went live, but from my understanding there was an emergency patch within a couple hours of release because the game wouldn't even stop crashing for the majority of players. And even after that, the game was plagued by issues. It suffered from performance issues on hardware that both met and far exceeded the specs listed on the Steam page. For example, I was running a GTX 960 with a overclocked 6600K at the time, which is far above the recommended specs of a 750 Ti and Haswell i5, and I was still getting weird frame drops in certain areas. There was also a huge hang-up with the cutscenes, where they frequently lagged and stuttered if you didn't run Steam in big picture mode. Not to mention a weird hitch I ran into the first time I capped footage, where I couldn't keep it in full screen with Afterburner running and was forced to record in windowed mode. Granted, I was using an old version of Afterburner that couldn't even get a stable overclock on my GPU, so that may have been my own fault. I did update Afterburner, and even managed to get an overclock onto my new GPU with the newest version, so hopefully any other hitches on my end are fixed as well. Thankfully though, Saga was fairly prompt in fixing this, and on November 23rd a massive patch rolled out that fixed all the issues. I'm confident in saying the game runs flawlessly without any workarounds now. Spoilers are incoming, so be forewarned and skip to where I tell you in the little annotation that should be coming up on the screen if you haven't played the game and you care enough about the story that you don't want to be spoiled. The story is definitely a step in the right direction, so far as Saga letting the writers have more leash to tell a darker and more serious tale. Right out of the gate, Sonic suffers a Disney death that leaves the audience thinking he might actually be gone for the first few missions. The first cutscene post-Eggman takeover has Amy trying to process her hero being gone, and Knuckles mentioning it put Tail in a state of emotional breakdown.
I still dream that Sonic is with us. Do you think he might be...
I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. Sonic is gone, Amy, and Tails has just lost it.
Definitely a lot darker than Saga's allowed since Sonic's much more short-lived death in Sonic Adventure 2. About here is where I want to discuss my major gripe with the storytelling, and how I think it could have been fixed to greatly improve the story's flow, and the character development. I'm sure most of you know by now I'm an aspiring writer and artist who feels obligated to hand out writing advice in my reviews when something hits me hard enough to discuss it. Tails' subplot starts off good with a scene of him being ambushed by Chaos and screaming out for Sonic. Rather than this being an emotional moment where he has to face the loss and finally fight for himself, classic Sonic pops up and saves the day, and also gets shoehorned into the plot from here on out. Not long after this, classic Sonic and Tails discover Sonic is still alive when they overhear Eggman and Infinite discussing his escape from prison. I think this is where classic Sonic throws a wrench in the works of the story by stealing the thunder of what could have been Tails' subplot. From this point on, we could have come in on Tails dealing with the loss until he finds out Sonic is still alive, and then trying to process this as he tracks him down. Had we not had classic Sonic forced into the script, Tails could have even been a playable character from this point forward in order to pull this off. In this way, we've also could have seen some character development and saw what he was going through. He could have also had a more active role in the plot and been sent on a lot of the missions that were given to classic Sonic in the final product. Personally, I think this would have fixed a lot of the issues with the writing, and it also would have killed the unfair comparisons to both Mania and Generations that were caused solely by having classic Sonic in the plot. My only other gripe is that I wish some of the characters showed some more intense emotions to really drive home the serious tone of the story. But I know there's a Saga mandate that the characters aren't allowed to show excessive emotion, so I can't fault that too much on the writers. The cliff notes on the rest of the story are that the Resistance has found out Sonic is still alive, they're the ones that rescued him, and bring him back to base. Tearful reunions are had. Sonic makes a horrible pun after him and Tails share what might be the first brotherly hug they ever get on screen in an actual game. The new recruit actually gets to talk to Knuckles with pants on this time, if you so desire, and we set out to save the world. Also with pants. Now is a good time as any to mention I find Infinite an interesting villain that I'd love to see fleshed out and used more. Not only does he come off as genuinely intimidating and sadistic in contrast with some of the more cartoonish villains we're used to, but he has an interesting start of darkness. The short of it is that he was a proud mercenary that likely had a sense of honor and self-worth built around his strength. When him and his entire squad are effortlessly curb stomped by Shadow, this just completely shatters him. At this point, he decides he wants to get stronger by all costs, and this is why he lets Eggman experiment on him with the Phantom Ruby, and eventually becomes the monster known as Infinite. Let's get into the meat of all this, though, shall we? After all, the support structure of a good game is the gameplay itself and its presentation. The major gameplay innovation that was marketed heavily here is, of course, the Avatar, the custom-created character. An interesting experiment because it's the first time Sonic has allowed the player to create and customize their own character. If you ask me, it's long overdue for a series that's just so thoroughly enjoyable to design fan characters for. One thing I did have an issue with that might frustrate some players is the fact you only get a bare bones amount of clothing and gear to start with. Everything else has to be unlocked by completing levels and gameplay challenges. The game does offer a massive selection and range of clothing once you actually get the ball rolling and start unlocking stuff, though. Thankfully, it also tends to offer a fairly large selection of rewards rather than slowly doling out one piece of clothing at a time. This makes the process of unlocking clothing and gear much faster and ensures you'll quickly build a nice wardrobe to choose from. You can also choose from 6 different species that each have their own unique gameplay perk. For example, dogs start with 5 rings upon respawning after death, and birds can fly higher with a double jump. Bizarrely enough, despite the basics like hedgehogs, rabbits, cats, and birds being accounted for, there's no option for other fan favorite species like foxes. There's also no option for any scalies like chameleons or other reptiles. And all this comes off rather odd when it includes so many species rarely or never used in canon like dogs and bears. Some of the abilities are also rather lackluster, like the cat always retaining 1 ring after a hit. This seems to be an anti-frustration feature in place anyway on normal mode, where you lose a set number of rings instead of all of them, so this comes off sort of redundant. The gameplay isn't perfect. It sometimes suffers from slippery physics and controls that could be a bit tighter, and breakneck speed sometimes slow weakness when attempting the light platforming in some of the side-scroller missions. That being said, it's still a Sonic game, and I still found the gameplay fun and satisfying once I got acquainted with the controls and compensating for the little quirks of the engine. It sort of became instinctive just to play that way after a while. Learning to be quick on your toes with the homing attack will also become your best friend. The only real oddity that struck me as off was that wall jumping was implemented for the Avatar, but only to be introduced in a single late game stage and not used anywhere else. I would honestly love to hear the thought process behind this, because it just seems like a bizarre design choice. For those that bought the launch edition, there's also Episode Shadow. This expands the backstory a bit, especially by showing some of Infinite's motivations. However, it's an extremely short DLC that consists of only 3 levels, and most of them are rehashes of areas seen from the main game. Of note, though, is that it does unlock Shadow as a playable character in a lot of the stages for modern Sonic, so you do get more use out of it if you really enjoy playing as Shadow. I guess the only thing left to do is to sum this whole thing up with my final thoughts and an obligatory score. I'll start by saying the general consensus for this game across all platforms seems to be a solid 7 out of 10. I'm going to be a bit more generous and give it a more solid 8 out of 10. The game has its flaws, and it's not going to be anything to reinvent the 3D platforming genre. The story definitely has room for improvement, and I stand by my opinion that including Classic Sonic wasn't the right move. That being said, though, I still had a blast with it, and in the end, maybe that's what matters with a game like this. The gameplay was overall enjoyable, and despite its flaws, I like where the story went and the possibilities, with Saga now seeming more open to darker storylines in Sonic games. I hope this means we might see Saga finally let this franchise mature a little bit. That maybe this will translate into more creative freedom that allows for character development, better storytelling, and some emotional moments in future modern Sonic titles. God knows with the Archie comic canceled and the IDW comic looking like it's going to have a rocky start, with the information we have, we need somebody to step up and not be afraid to take risk and tell interesting stories with the property. If Saga loosens up a bit and lets their internal staff take that charge, it might just lead to that happening.